Welcome everyone to our virtual roundtable for DevOps, a topic very near and dear to my heart. We're excited to be here today to talk about everything going on in DevOps with software companies all over the planet. My name is Jesse, and I've been working in tech since the 90s, long time ago, and currently serving as the chief technologist here at DZone. I got my start as a developer, just like many of you, and I spent a lot of time working on the Java programming language in the data space and managing teams of developers to deliver awesome products. Back then, DevOps was not even a word that we used in our vocabulary, but we were still doing the job of building and deploying software. Both locally and client server networks, these were kind of pioneering days. Nowadays, we have a ton of good practices. We have frameworks, we have software, but making the decisions on the best thing to do and experimenting takes time and effort. Our hope is that today you will leave here with a good understanding of what's out there and get some insight that can help you work on your own application and team infrastructure, whether that's a small single app or a mega scale microservice SaaS application running in the cloud. We have just released our latest trend report on DevOps that you can download at DZone.com. Shout out to the design team for the new cover. It looks great. DZone.com is the perfect place to go and get updates on the latest best practices, products, architecture, anything related to technology. It's trusted by millions of developers and technical leaders every single day to keep them up to date on the latest developments. I'm excited to get started, but if you'd like to send this to a friend or watch other events on demand, just go to dzone.com/events and see all of our on-demand content. Now, I'm very excited to have some panelists, some experts with us. So we'll go around and introduce them all as we get started. First up, Shubha Rao, say hi, wave. Shubha here from JFrog, one of our sponsors. Thank you. We also have Mark Traster. Say hi, Mark.
Hello,
Mark's
everyone.
Vice President of Strategy at Progress, also a sponsor. Rade Despodovsky, co-founder at Microtica. Hey, Rade.
Hi, everyone.
Justin Albano, software engineer from IBM. He's been on a few shows with us before. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. I want to kick us off with talking about CI/CD, pipelines, application delivery, release orchestration, whatever you want to call it. Now, when we sent our survey out, we got some interesting results back. One of the questions we had is, how often does your organization release to production? And I know that's a hot topic with development teams, and a third of our respondents said their organizations are weekly or faster. A third said each month, and a third said less than once a month. Now, when you ask about how people feel, about 50% of everybody says we're doing just the right timing. So this is a high confidence level in the company's release cadence. But does the type of software that we're releasing have any effect on the frequency of the release? For example, like Justin, Shubha, I'll start with you from JFrog. Do you think that that has any bearing on the cycles that we're doing?
So Jesse, it definitely does. I talk to multiple customers every day, right? So one of the things that definitely differentiates is how much of legacy software they have and what is the compliancy that they have to adhere to, right? So many customers who have a lot of legacy, for example, if you go to telecom industry or if you look at something like a gaming industry, they do have a bunch of legacy stuff. So these legacy, from an automation perspective, it's very difficult. So CD, automating for the CD is very tricky in this case. So this is where customers say that, I have my release maybe once a month, once in 2 months. In the telecom industry, I've seen some really longer cases wherein it's been once a quarter, right? Whereas the software that's more containerized, that's more Docker, this is where you have a release happening once in 2 weeks as well. It's the same with JFrog. So if you look at Artifactory, we have a release coming in every 2 weeks. The same with X-Ray as well, right?
Yep,
so
I remember.
Type of software definitely matters.
Okay, so Justin, on the ground with the software development teams, would you agree?
Yes, I really agree with that because it depends on what the type of application you're writing is. If you're writing something like use a pretty common example is like Facebook, right? You're updating the back end or the front end of Facebook, and you have different goals that you want to get out to the customer as quickly as possible. Pushing a change might be a daily occurrence as opposed to a weekly or monthly or quarterly occurrence. if you have, like Shuba said, old legacy code, or if you're in a legacy industry, the release cadence might slow down because you might have a larger feature set, or you might have a higher level of compliance that you have to meet to be able to get that code out to a customer. And a customer would rather wait, let's say, a month to make sure that that code's rock solid and it's a larger change in one shot than they would pick up a smaller change, kind of like almost think of it as micro changes over the period of days or weeks.
Yeah. All right, Mark, you were going to say something. So come on. I
Yeah,
mean,
no,
I
no.
am a legacy guy. I'm like a legacy human. So I figured,
Well,
if you want to jump in there, let's go.
I'm a double legacy then. Well, no, I was going to pick up on one of the things that was in your survey that showed embedded systems were even least, it was probably the slowest.
Yeah.
And one of the focuses that we have at Chef that is owned by Progress is that we help a lot with people that are doing edge devices. So point of sale devices, anything running Linux or Windows, but an industrial edge device. And so that's where the real challenge is, not only in terms of getting the software ready to go, but to get it deployed in all those remote locations. So that's anot's angle that's important for us to look at.
Yeah. Roddy, are you with? I mean, well, I tend to think it could be a one size fits all. I think any piece of software you could release that often. But maybe I'm wrong. Roddy, do you agree with me, or do you agree with the rest of the panel?
Yeah, I mean, definitely in that terms, it's not one size fits all. What I wanted to say also before was that, like, taking the software as a service, like it's also kind of how frequently you release. It's kind of like also like a survival component. You have to be in front of your competitors. You have to listen to your customers. So this feedback loop and releasing really fast. For example, we release every day and weekly some much bigger releases, which is kind of interesting in that terms of business. And like one size fits all, it's definitely not something that it's something that it's in this continuous delivery, because also from the perspective of the software that you're releasing, but also from the perspective of the team, how your team is big. Are you working in an enterprise company where it's required to have some certain rules in order to release something? So the delivery process itself is really different from one company to the other based on their requirements and many more aspects that we could discuss. But those two, I think, are the most important thing.
Yeah, you're gonna make me put on my product manager hat and say, what is a release? Right. So that Shuba's getting it right. We laugh, but that's the thing, right? Is when we had such a high confidence level and everybody thinks their release cadence is about right. It does depend on the software. It also depends on the definition of what's in a release, because we can get what some people call a hot fix out pretty quick, right? Now, the real question is, where does your organization fit? So at Microtica, Roddy, how often do y'all release?
So we release on a daily basis bug fixes and some small improvements, and on a weekly basis new features and like medium releases, so to say. So yeah.
Okay. And Shuba, you said Artifactory every 2 weeks. That's awesome.
So here is where I do want to bring up another point. Mark, you also mentioned about edge devices today, right? So when you go to IoT, the CD takes, it's a completely different beast, because security also comes into picture, right? So I'll take it in two perspectives, right? One is if there are any security issues that have been identified. So for it to be fixed, we don't wait for the 2-week release or 3-week release. We do it right away, right? So this is the same case for IoT devices as well. So this is where the CD aspect of it has to be automated, but there is also a lot of difficulties or challenges with automation as well, wherein if there is a cert that has it's not valid anymore, how do you make sure that you upgrade these things as quickly as possible? So for us specifically, as I said, it's 2 to 3 weeks, but whenever there is a security, it's a hot fix, right as soon as possible.
Yeah. Now, getting into security, that brings up the topic of responsibility. So who's responsible for deployments, right? We had that question in our survey as well. And when we asked that, we had 39% The majority was split, 39% everyone, and then 37% release manager. Does everybody agree? What do you all think? There seems to, I mean, there's some polarizing differences, right, to the response. So, what are your thoughts around that? Mark, you look like you got something. Come on.
I think I was kind of surprised at how low the release number was in terms of like how many people actually had that formal person assigned to do that. So, I mean, we kind of see a variety of different things in terms of the accounts that we support. I think what we really advocate is, we want to get everybody involved, but somebody needs to be responsible, right? And so, and when we say everybody, we're talking about developer, IT ops, and security, and then different types of security so that we can actually get everybody involved up front and ready to go. And then, we really like what we promote as kind of human free zone. So once you've actually, checked something in, you've done your 2-person rule or whatever it is that you want to use, then make sure that the humans are removed, at least from, making sure that everything gets done. And then the humans can jump in if there's an exception that can't be remediated automatically. So it's really, I think it is a team-based approach that's based on collaboration, but ultimately somebody has to be responsible, and then you let the automation take over.
Right. And, Justin, down on the dev side, right, we're talking about responsibility. You're going to get into dev versus ops. And for those of y'all who read the trend report, Daniel makes cartoons, kind of like a Dilbert. And he had a really funny one around this responsibility thing, like dev and ops teams, when they're not getting along, sometimes, the developer says it works on my machine. And then the operation or the ops side says, well, why don't you just give your machine to the customer then? Why don't we just put that sucker in the cloud? So, Justin, what's your perspective on that from the engineering versus ops side?
I agree with Mark. I think there's two differentiators here. There's a person who's responsible or a party that's responsible at the end of the day. But as far as taking part in the release cycle and let's say the pipeline that you set up, I think that's a across the spectrum responsibility. A lot of times people like to always, the magic answer for who's responsible is always somebody else, right? Because no one wants to be that person that gets caught in the critical path someplace. But from a dev side, personally, I find it better that we start pulling things like the configuration for a pipeline into our repository, or having things scripted, even if we don't have control over the process and when it gets executed per se. And let's say there's a restriction where we have to do some sort of performance testing after a certain period in the pipeline, that we have access to what gets executed in that performance step. So the more stuff that gets brought into the development side and the code side is the less stuff that a release engineering team has to worry about in terms of writing actual tests, or what happens if this test is failing, I have to notify this person. We try to take as much of that and bring it onto the dev side, and leave the parts that a release engineer or release engineering team know best, and leave that to their responsibility.
Yeah. And now we're getting into the whole infrastructure as code piece, right? So build as much of it and make as much of it as automated as possible. Right. Back in the 96, our automation system was written in K-shell on a Linux machine, right? That's old school. But even back then, almost 30 years ago, pushing it, we were trying to automate things so the humans, because we would make mistakes. Oh, I forgot to pull this, or I forgot to change the permissions here, or I did my pull wrong, whatever it is, to Mark's point. But what's cool is that we have tools that are building in more than just some of those manual processes. More and more, we're getting into policy, risk management, security, all through the pipeline, right? So, Rade, I see you shaking your head. And, Maria wrote one of the things that was really interesting into the infrastructure as code article in our trend report. So what are your thoughts around that? You're shaking your head in agreement. So give us something.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the beauty of the infrastructure is the code. So basically, you're treating the infrastructure like you treat your application. So you store your infrastructure specification into the source code, and you automate the whole delivery life cycle of the code, which means that we are also, like we discussed before about the shifting left, right? So we are shifting left, giving more visibility to the developers and responsibilities for the developers on one hand, which is good, but also we have to implement those security, compliance, and any other mechanisms which are out of scope of the developers in place. So we make sure if something gets changed, we make sure that that's secure. And moving the application and the infrastructure into one place, basically, it's much easier to control the whole delivery process, and also making it to be reproducible across multiple environments. Because the biggest problem that we had before, you Jesse mentioned that before, most of the operations were either scripting or going into the cloud console and doing that manually, which is a nightmare when you want to move to, for example, development to a production environment. Will remember all of that. Like, you have to write them somewhere, and always there will be some mistakes. So the mistakes now are reduced to the minimum once you define everything as a code.
Yeah, and on the infrastructure side, sometimes it's a machine didn't get deployed right, or the machine's broken. But on the security side, thinking DevSecOps, it could be more than that. So Mark, we're talking about not just our infrastructure, but making our policies and our security as part of this code. So tell us a little bit about that, and give us some insights there, because I think that's an important addition to the infra as code.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think Roddy had the right approach, right? Being able to treat everything that you do in terms of DevSecOps and manage that just as you do the application. Yeah. And to your point, kind of extending from infrastructure to what we refer to as policy as code. And, I'm surprised you didn't make a joke about low code, no code, but when we talk about policy as code, I think what's important is that it needs to be human readable, but machine enforceable. So I think that's critical. And the other thing too, as it relates to kind of all things CI/CD, I kind of look at what a developer does when they check something in, or some other process that's kind of happening from the left, as kind of a forward trigger. It triggers some action that should be automated, and then it eventually pushes things to production or whatever. We kind of look at kind of policy as code, being able to check the configuration on a continuous basis, wherever it is, if it's in the cloud or on premise. And then if we find something that's out of sync, that's drifted or has changed for whatever reason, then, we kind of refer to that as a reverse trigger, which what does that do? Well, that just, synchronizes or puts everything back into sync based on what you've actually checked into GitOps or whatever. So it's kind of a continuous way of looking at it, which I think is really, and the foundation of that, to your point, is really policy as code.
Yeah. And don't get me started on low code, no code. We did a preview fireside chat last month, and that went off the rails. I asked the question, what is a developer? And then the whole thing was, y'all should watch that if you get a chance. So want to dive in a little more on the CD side, right? Continuous delivery, since we were just talking about that. And we asked our respondents, ranking your top reasons for adopting continuous delivery: increased speed of feature delivery, same as last year; shortened development cycles, same position as last year. Here's the kicker: reduced complexity of development cycles jumped from 5th place to 3rd place this year. So, do you have any insights on why you think complexity has been reduced more over the past year, at least in the developer's eyes? And do you agree with speed of delivery and shortened development cycles, higher code quality type stuff, as being the top reasons? And Shubha, we'll go with you first.
Yeah, so it definitely makes sense, right? Today, there is so much automation in place, but here is where tool sprawl will also come into picture. But let's not get into that. That's a whole big conversation here. But security as part of the DevOps, which used to be just Dev and Ops before, but now it's DevSecOps is the terminology, right? Because security is more ingrained into each and every process throughout the CI/CD. The life cycle has definitely shortened, because before deployment, it's not like security is an afterthought. Just before deployment, I do the security and then decide whether to go ahead or not, right? Security is now inbuilt. It's as shift left, as Rade was mentioning. So here is where something that I'm developing today might be in production tomorrow. So this is where security is everyone's responsibility. And this is how it's definitely helping developers get faster and take better decisions.
Nice. And on the developer side, going all the way to the left, and it's funny, Justin, you are on the far left of my screen, which is great. But on the far left down there with the developers, are you seeing that reduced complexity from where you sit as well?
Yes. And I agree with what Shubha said. I think one of the main reasons why we're seeing a reduction in complexity is because the tooling has gotten so advanced, even from when CI/CD started to like come onto the scene. It wasn't rudimentary. Like we've been automating things for years, but I think this has become basically a de facto standard on how we release software now, as opposed to trying to make its way into the industry. And I think another reason why a lot of times going from, let's say, a manual process to an automated process will reduce the complexity of your release is because it forces you to look at what your release process looks like. So a lot of times there's hidden things in there, like, I have to go talk to so-and-so, or I have to go to this team who's the only team
Right.
that's available that can do this thing. And if they're all on vacation, we're kind of just stopped for a week, right? So I
Yeah.
think the automation part a lot of times makes you find where there's gaps and there's holes in your release process as you try to formalize that release process.
Yeah, and I like the fact that the more people adopt these tools and these pipelines, complexity is going to go down. The 77% of our respondents said that their applications are higher quality, so fewer bugs are escaping and all that kind of stuff when we look at velocity trends. But there's things that are standing in people's way as well. There are these barriers to adopting a real good CI/CD pipeline, and so we did a little bit around the survey into that. And one of the ones, the number one reason was that the automated tests that we're having, that we're writing, that we're deploying, are either too brittle, too permissive, right? So that's testing. The second one at 39% was our development teams don't have the right skill sets, right? New tools, new processes, got to, upskill a little bit. The third one was interesting to me. 33% said company culture, right? So the barriers to adoption are not just technological, they're organizational. Right. So we have a culture mismatch. So why do you think that's the case? And Mark, I'm going to jump to you first because you had a very cool reaction when I said company culture. So what's your take on that?
Well, what's interesting is we actually just completed a 600-person survey too for DevSecOps, and we asked a more question around adoption barriers, and one of the highest ones was company culture. But what was even more interesting, and I think I have a guess as to why, was that while it was the highest barrier, that was the lowest thing that people were going to invest in the next 12 to 18 months. So
Right.
it was the lowest thing. And I think it's like, well, that just didn't seem wrong. And then I realized nobody wants to touch it. Nobody, we're all technology nerds, and nobody wants to go out there and like figure out the people thing. I'm just joking a little bit. Well, I'm not for me, but anyway, so it's easier to focus on tools like technology and all that other stuff. So, but it is a huge thing, and it's right. It's not just organization. And we also saw in that same survey, one of the things that was hurting buy-in, which was also a cultural thing, is the lack of ROI, true ROI in terms of being able to prove it, which means top down, you don't get your support, and then that kind of torpedoes the culture piece. But yeah, no, it's fascinating subject.
It is. And company and culture, I love culture. I'm a personal human. I love all the peoples. And so I think it's crazy that we're not focusing on it, but it is a huge issue. And Rade, you were nodding your head too. Give me your take on it, because this culture thing's super important, not just, and sometimes it's just the engineering versus the business side, but sometimes it's something else. So would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's when you have a technology people, so they will jump in and implement something. But it's more important that culture. I agree, and it's also it's definitely hard to change people behavior, especially in the much larger companies. When they have to change something like their behavior, how they work, and that's why you have a push. To basically implement that. And also one of the most important thing there, it's not, as you said, it's not just technology, but also the importance of the leadership and management support into DevOps adoption, and the management has to advocate the DevOps and prioritize its adoptions on, and it's for the technology people to engineer that and implement. But it's that component of the culture and management involvement. It's very, very important, because without that, it won't succeed. Definitely, I've seen in the past, the technology team will implement that, but we will do that, like management will do after 6 months and adopt on that. It doesn't work like that. So it won't work.
Yeah, because you miss out on 6 months of improvement. It takes a while to deploy it. We already discussed we
Yeah.
have to upskill, right? You have to learn new skill sets and pipelines and stuff.
Yeah.
Shubha, you were looking like you wanted to jump in there. So go ahead. What are your thoughts around this? Super important topic.
Yeah, so ROI is definitely something that we are having this discussion almost on a day-to-day basis with many customers today. Because in a way, from a business perspective, what's in it for me, right? What am I getting out of this investment today? So this is where there is a huge gap in how business looks at CI/CD and how we technologists look at it, right? So this is where I really loved some of the terminologies that are coming out today, right? Such as secure software supply chain. It is secure now. Security is now an integral part of it. So people understand why I need to have security as part of my pipeline so that it gets there, it gets to the deployment as quickly as possible. IAC, why should I even invest in IAC? Because I want to make sure that there is no issues with my deployment. Why is deployment important? Because this is where you'll have your products faster. So there is definitely a gap. Business folks are, even from a procurement perspective, when we talk to them, they try to understand what's in it for me. But there is much more knowledge in the market today, I believe, compared to how it was in the last 2 years at least.
Awesome. Justin, get in there.
I bouncing off what Shubha said, I think that's a really important part of this adoption process. A lot of times we don't look at it as a developer from the perspective of management. Their job is to release a product with the best quality in the shortest period of time with the least cost, right? That's what they see at the end of the day. And from a development side, that's our goal too. We just take it from a different perspective. So I think one of the parts that gets lost a lot of times when people introduce a CI/CD pipeline or they make improvements to that pipeline, whether it's, let's say security was a manual process and now we're going to introduce security into our pipeline, is tracking in some way to show that the introduction of that part or introducing a pipeline in general actually does reduce, whether it's the bug count, the time to release, the quality, coming up with some metrics that you're able to see in the last 6 months, our bug count has gone down 25%, and it's due to this increase in process. So a lot of times we'll just have this feeling that, okay, I've reduced the bug count, or I can tell there's less customer issues coming in, but it's important to track those things from beginning to end. And that's the way a manager wants to see, okay, I can see that this process is actually helping me out. And that's where your investment, whether it's in time, effort, money, starts to get put into that process.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm glad you jumped in there and said it, because I feel like that's part of the responsibility of the developers and the development managers, is to try to figure out how to cross that bridge, that communication gap with the business side. There's a lot of value in this stuff. There really, really is. And if it's something as simple, Justin, as you said, as keeping track of some things and showing some proof points and some data, right? We've got surveys. There's all kinds of information out there. To Shubha's point, let's get that information in their hands, because then the business people on the other side can see the value of that, and we can start to bridge that cultural gap. I think that's a good word. All right. Anything else? I mean, there's always tension created between the stakeholders whenever you're talking about changing the process on how you get the software out the door to the customers, right? You always got to do it faster with higher quality. And sometimes those things are at odds. So what about the tensions that you see? Are they just related to the business and the dev side, or are there tensions even within the dev side?
So
Anybody?
I would say security definitely takes a higher rank there.
Okay.
Because this is where, again, going back to maybe, 4 years or 3 years back, security was there, but it was not like a huge decision maker in some of these CD processes. But definitely the issue that came out related to Log4j and everything that's happening, right? The S-bomb conversation that started because of the White House, security definitely has a bigger play now, right? So this is where they'll definitely have it's becoming more complex conversations, but it's definitely getting better.
So there's definitely tension there on the security side. Mark, you seeing that from the DevSecOps side?
Yeah, I mean, we saw it in the survey that we did, and the highest thing that led to lack of confidence was collaboration between dev and security. And so we saw that there, but we're also seeing some really promising results too, where if people do extend compliance management to security management, compliance management, and kind of take that continuous approach, which we're all talking about, we've been able to help customers be able to like automate their processes in terms of not only deployment, but security checks. And so they're continuously in compliance to the point where we'll have somebody say, hey, when I have to do an audit, all I have to do is print a screen, back to providing this visibility across different teams, which is critical for collaboration. So I think that's what can be possible and is possible with the right approach, getting people involved, getting it automated, because ultimately that's what it's going to take.
Okay. And it's interesting. So want to dig in on the automated side, because we said, earlier that not everybody has a fully automated process, right? We still want that person, right? That release manager, that person, or we'll call it a role, even if it's not, right? So it's a word we use very frequently when it comes to CI/CD stuff. We did a poll in our survey, right? Do your organization's deployments to production require any manual steps? 61% said yes. Rade, is your stuff 100% automated? Are there any manual steps at all? Or
I will lean towards the fully automation. So I suffered a lot in the past having that opinion. So basically,
the voice of experience.
I just want to automate everything, and you come up like spending a lot of time just implementing something simple that maybe also it makes sense to be manual. So I think you have to find a fine balance between the full automation and what makes sense, and especially in the if you have smaller team, there is a bigger opportunity to implement to automate everything. But if you have more complex solution, again, where you have some legal and compliance aspect involved, then I mean that's required to have some of the manual steps. But I would say going towards more automation and automate as everything as possible. It's something that's I mean really important in my opinion.
Okay. Now, and I'll ask all of you the same question, because it's interesting. I put my Wayback Machine and I flip that bit and I go back, and I remember carrying CDs or discs around and having people sign them, like initial them, the Golden Master, if y'all were back around those times. But, we've come a long way. So checks and balances, Justin, any merit in having some manual processes?
Yeah, I agree with Rad's point that I think we want to think in a process of automating everything. Like that should be the peak of the mountain. Like that should be the goal. There are going to be times though that either an automated process is a better way of doing something, or that's just like from a pragmatic standpoint, that's just how it is at the moment. Like that's as far as we can get right at this point. Because a lot of times I think groups will get caught up with the idea of it's an all or nothing endeavor. So they'll look at, let's say they have a complete manual process and they want to move to a CI/CD pipeline. They'll think in their head, well, I have no automated testing in this area or whatever it is, or I have no automated security checks. And that's a huge hurdle across to get from nothing being automated to everything being automated. And that is a huge hurdle, especially for any project that's bigger than just like a school size project, right?
Right.
But I think the main focus should be figuring out what parts can be automated that you get the most benefit from, and starting there. Whether it's, you have no unit test, you can find the most critical part of your system and unit test that, even if it's to 60% coverage or 80% coverage, it doesn't have to be 100. And that's where you'll get the most benefit for the smallest amount of effort. And you just keep building from there to get to a point where, if you're effective with it and your product has that ability, you may get to a point where you can automate the entire pipeline, but it's better to have 10% automated than nothing. And it's better to have 20% automated than 10.
Okay. All right. Well, we're running out of time. I have one final question for you all. One final question, just to round out the conversation, kind of bring it all, tie it all in a bow for everybody out there watching. We said that it's not really a one size fits all approach. right? There are different needs for different types of software for different teams. My final question to you is, based on your experience, what is your number one recommendation, right? We want people to learn and take something away from this today. What is your number one recommendation or lesson learned, right? Our voice from the experience side over there, when it comes to DevOps and DevSecOps? So what is the one thing that you want our listeners to take away from our time that we spent together today? And Shubha, I'll start with you.
Okay. For me, sorry, I'll have a couple of recommendations actually. The first one is definitely go cloud native. Containerization is the future. I
okay.
see still a lot of legacy things, and this is where the problems occur. The second one I see as an issue with the market right now is also the tool sprawl, right? So tool consolidation is one of the biggest conversation that that's happening today in the market. So again, DevSecOps is difficult. CI/CD, continuous having something perfect there is difficult, but this is a step-by-step approach. Building redundancy at each level is also very important. So when we go with the processes, look at what are the automation options that are available. Look at how you can integrate to get the information. As Mark was mentioning, you need something that's just printable to understand what's going on. So that's important. The third one I would say is also flexibility on where and how you can deploy, right?
Okay.
So multi-cloud deployment is also one of the biggest conversation today.
Awesome. All right, Mark.
Yeah, it's a tough question. Can I pass? I'm just kidding. No. First of all, this has been great spending time with you guys. But no, I think, there's so many things to talk about, but, given that Chef is really focused on configuration management and compliance of the configuration across, basically any cloud. We have SAP who is using us to make sure they can configure and remain in compliance across 4 different public clouds for 18 million assets. Right. And so when you get into that, and we're talking about some of the automation stuff, I'm not saying that we don't need to have a manual intervention in terms of what maybe kick off a process. But once you have your policies defined and defined as code, then automation really, really should take over, especially in situations like that, or situations like Panera, where they're updating every one of their cafes in the United States. They've, increased the frequency, and they've gone from 85% success rate to 99.999. And
Nice.
that's a point where you have to automate, right? Because there's not an IT professional sitting in every Panera food chain. So I think based on that, I think my recommendation was, even though it's not a one size fits all, if you can find a single approach or single framework for your DevOps work, you can do that across all of your different assets. And I think we've proven that in terms of being able to do that with the different customers. So that would be my advice. Look for a single DevOps framework that is extensible and that will fit into, your existing SDLC, and you can layer it in terms of doing configuration or compliance management across any asset that you have.
Awesome.
So
Friday.
that's smart.
Yeah. So the DevOps itself, especially in a much larger companies, it's a huge effort, and it's a huge investment for a company. That's why it's a bit scary to implement. And my advice would be start implementing step by step, as also Justin said. So implement what will give the most impact on the software quality and the software quality, and then build upon that, because DevOps it's not something which is static. You have to continuously improve the whole process. And also one other thing I would say is that we have to also, as an industry, work more on the awareness of the culture and everything which is really important besides the technology, to close the whole loop.
Yeah, awesome. Justin?
I think my one recommendation would be to focus on what you have within your, I would call it, sphere of influence, because a lot of times with implementing CI/CD or just about anything else when it comes to software and technology, we kind of get hung up on it's always somebody else are always a different group that's holding us back from doing the correct thing, right? So if
Mm.
we're a developer, it's always release engineering or the security team or management that won't let us put something in as, into the CI/CD realm, or vice versa. That could be the release engineering saying, hey, dev just doesn't automate enough stuff, so we can't do CI/CD. And I think a lot of times we'll waste our time and effort pointing fingers at, okay, what can another team do to make this process better? And I think one of the main things to do is look at, if I'm a developer in my case, I shouldn't be looking at what the release engineering team could do to make their release engineering process more automated. I should be
Hmm.
looking at, can I put in more tests in a certain area and start to get automated benefit here? And if they see a benefit there, they're going to just add it into the pipeline, right? I don't have control over another team. I don't have control over other people.
Right.
I just have control over that small realm that I'm working in. And we start from there and start to build out.
That's awesome. Well, we're out of time already. It's fascinating how quick time can go by when you have a great conversation. I appreciate each of you taking the time to be with us today. It was fascinating. Thank you for being a panelist. Special thanks for our sponsors, JFrog and Progress. We're very excited that y'all were sponsoring this chat today. Now, for everyone out there, we do want you to not leave us just yet. Just like a good DevOps process, we're always looking to improve. So please help by sticking around and for just a minute and filling out a very, very quick survey. And remember, you can always download the trend report at DZone.com. And if you want to share this or any of our other on-demand events, just go to DZone.com/events. Thanks.